Requirements. So, what are requirements? Well, requirements are the list of stuff you have to implement in your program, in your system, in order to create your terrific program. I put it as the things, events, or processes that the system needs to evaluate or produce. It's what the system, the software program needs to either evaluate, check, stop, negate, or actually produce, create, and send some output. It's kind of the most important component, let's say, of the software development process, and here we give it some special attention. So there are various types of requirements. So we can talk about business requirement, and that's we can also talk about this as kind of we see the word business, but generally what we mean in this context is the organizational requirements. And these are usually high level business goals such as decrease labor costs or increase productivity of workers or enable people to um, carry out some general organizational function. And then we have a list of user, and then we have the user requirements. So the user level requirements of kind of features. So they're kind of getting more specific to the solution requirements of the main concept of the system that you're trying to create, but more focused on the user level. So, for example, scan grocery item. Maybe your software program needs to be able to scan a grocery item by using some type of scanner. And so the user needs to be able to put the item on the system for the system to process. And now the requirements get more specific as functional or non-functional requirements. Sometimes these are called solution requirements. And the function or domain, sometimes they're called also domain, they're the main requirements of the system. So these are listed as specific features the system must implement. And then you kind of have to understand how systems work, information systems work, because you kind of have to put it in a more functional language. So maybe it would be something like add grocery item to a list of items in a particular purchase. If we're talking about this, let's say grocery scanning software or grocery scanning information system. And then there's also non-functional requirements, which are, they sound like non-important because it says non-functional, but they're actually very important. And they're about the specific qualities of the data and the features. So the image quality has to be a certain way, or the speed has to be appropriate. And it has to do with maybe the data has to be, of course, calculated correctly. So maybe the system will calculate some piece of information, calculate the total cost of the list of purchase. But of course, this has to be the right calculation. You cannot just be any calculation. So and so on. So both functional requirements are important, and the non-functional requirements are important as well. One is the specific features, and one is more about the quality of the features. So let's talk about requirement gathering for agile methodologies. And here I want to bring up this idea of stories, epics, and initiatives. Now, remember, this is a whole philosophy. This is related to also Scrum and other kinds of agile methodologies, and they develop their particular terminology and the meanings associated with their terminology. And these can be very useful for people to understand and implement these processes, these ideals. But of course, they are not the only ways that things can be done. So stories, also called user stories, are short requirements or requests written from the perspective of an end user. And then they have this term for epics, which is just a collection of stories, a large bodies of work that can be broken down to a number of smaller tasks called stories. So it's just a bunch of stories. And then initiatives are a number of epics. So it's just a kind of basic sort of hierarchy here of stories and then epics and then initiatives. And why is stories important? Stories are actually really important, and they help us understand and develop software programs because it keeps the focus on the user. The stories serve as to-do lists of specific tasks that can be checked off. Stories enable collaboration, makes it easier with the end goal defined. The team can work together to decide how best to serve the user and meet the goal. Stories drive creative solutions. Stories can encourage the team to think critically and creatively, and stories create momentum. With each passing story, the development team enjoys a small challenge and a small win, driving momentum. Now, this comes from Atlassian.com here, and I'm not really sure if stories actually do all these things, but they are suggesting they do. And so always keep a skeptical mind when people say one thing does another thing. Well, you have to kind of prove it. But as we can see, at least initially, maybe there is intuitively some some sort of indication that stories are good. And indeed, I think they are, and you will see what the advantages are. So a user story may look something like this. It will be a prompt where people will put as a particular role, I want a specific goal, so that there's some benefits, and there's some also list of conditions of satisfaction. So if we use an example here, as an account manager, I want a sales report of my account to be sent to my inbox daily so that I can monitor the sales progress of my customer portfolio. Note that this is not really computer language. This is just a general language of the user, the person in their day-to-day organization, and what they need to do. And also some conditions of satisfaction. The report is sent daily to my inbox. The report contains the following sales details. The report is in CSV format. So also user language, user story, there's a progression. It's understandable to maybe everyone involved, even if you're not part of this area. And then it helps later make the specific functional requirements and non-functional requirements. Another way to think about it here, as I want, so that why from Lean Dog, and you can kind of break it down. Who will receive the value from the future? What does the stakeholder want that helps him or her accomplish a goal? Why does the stakeholder want this feature? And this questions, prompts that help us develop user stories to then identify what the features of the system should be. Requirements gathering for agile methodologies. We will employ user stories, and then may also use these story cards to turn and to identify the specific features and then turn them into action. So there's this kind of idea of the three C's. So the card involves physically writing out the story card, as we just viewed, which can be done by anyone on the team. There's a conversation. So user stories are simple and brief, but then questions and more details should be answered by conversation with the product owner or the teammate. Product owner, not necessarily the client, and I think not wouldn't be the client, but somebody, once again, designated to make sure that the features are implementing the requirements. And the confirmation. So finally define the story's acceptance tests, which specify specifically what has to happen or function properly for the feature to be acceptable. So this is something about gathering requirements for developing software programs using agile methodologies. Now, of course, there are issues with any complex activity. So there's usually a problem of scope, identifying the boundaries of what the system should do or should not do, as you are given very general requirements and you need to identify specific features. You don't know how many features you really need. Also, because it is an iterative approach, we go from analysis to then user input. You can always kind of come back and keep adding more features, and that creates a problem of scope if the features keep always being added. Problems of understanding. So have someone who can translate between domain experts and software development is a solution, but there are problems of communication between business goals and others in the development team. Potentially problem of volatility. So that's the idea of managing change, because it's an iterative, fast approach, and because other things are changing as well fast, and the process itself allows for constant change, then there is potential high degrees of volatility. Problems that are non-technical as well. So political or organizational issues, that if that the software developers may not address and probably should not address, and maybe have to product owners may have to address. But either way, there can be political organizational problems that will impact the features that I need to be made, and that's kind of one of the issues, this set of issues when we're dealing with software development as well. So that's something about issues in requirements. That's something about requirements in general. I'm going to point you to more information to this textbook here, and I'll see you next time.